Satoshi-san the most big to for taking this time to share your learnings about neuroscience for marketing success. A couple of things which I would like to take you all through about this session. So, quickly, what is expected of you all when you are joining this session? That there is a translation provided. So, if any of you are joining this session and wants to listen to the Chinese translations, you can see that there is a button which is a globe icon, or very likely a more icon which is there, so that you can click any of those buttons and at the bottom of the screen, and then you can choose interpretation and choose Chinese. So one of the things which you might want to do is to mute the original audio so that you don't listen to both the English and the Chinese at the same time. So that's the only thing which you need to do if you need to listen to Chinese. And Jeff is on this call, who is doing the Chinese live translations. So if you're comfortable listening to Chinese, please switch on that channel. A couple of other things, we would expect you to keep your microphone on mute, and also your camera function turned off. But when you are asking any questions, please put it in the chat function as of now, and then Satoshi-san can take those questions right at the end. If you want to ask questions directly, you can always unmute right at the end of the session and then ask your questions. One of the things which we would please request you to not take screenshots and do not share any contents or post it on social media. If you want to have a recording, yes, we will be posting that on YouTube. We have taken the permission of Satoshi-san for recording this session and then posting it later. And also in Lazada groups, we will be posting it, so you will get to see it again. And that's something which you can share because that's official version. And yeah, so if you have any questions, please put it in the chat. So thanks again for joining us. So I would like to quickly introduce Satoshi-san as well. And so Satoshi-san is he is a Ph.D. and he's a director and neuroscientist at that Fig Tree. So that's basically agency where who specializes in a few different things, and one of them is about neuroscience. So Satoshi-san is passionate about understanding the human mind and behavior, obviously, and that's why he is a neuroscientist. And his academic journey started in cognitive and evolutionary psychology, and then he has done his PhD in systems neuroscience. So he has been doing a lot of studies on brain activity, and yeah, and he's teaching at some prestigious universities before this, and then he moved to working in that Fig Tree and in generally in the industry. So he has worked across the Asia Pac region, and he's been doing a lot of speaking engagements. One of that is Brain Food session as well, which he's kindly agreed to do for all of us. Welcome, Satoshi-san. I would pass the thing to you so that you can share your screen and take it over from here.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sanjita. It's a great introduction. So, hi everyone. Thanks once again joining us today. I'm really thrilled to be here today, sharing my insights and experiences with all of you. First of all, let me share my screen. Okay, I hope it works right now. Does it look okay, Sanchita or Haris?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, good. Okay, let's get started. So the topic today is about the neuroscience for marketing. This is really about my expertise, and hence, once again, let me briefly introduce you to myself. So I began my professional journey as a neuroscientist conducting experiments with a lot of monkeys. It was really fun. I spent about 10 years with monkeys at the beginning of my career. And then I shifted my focus from monkey's brain to human brain, along with the teaching at the universities. Then about a decade ago, I took a big leap to the industry, joining a research agency. So the mission was to apply the neuroscience knowledge and techniques to gain a deeper understanding of consumer attitudes and behaviors. That's sort of the definition of the consumer neuroscience. So based on this expertise, I will walk you through this agenda today, which starts from the theoretical foundation using a lot of examples. That is followed by just a little bit of the methodology part that can bridge the gap between the theories to the application. The last part is about the best practices, which is more like the actionable insights, which can be hopefully used even from today, hopefully. So to kick things off, maybe it looks silly, but let's play a simple game that can highlight the foundation of this talk. Can you find the differences? How many differences can you find between the top and bottom illustrations here? Can you try a little bit? So these are the answers. But of course, no worries about how many you found. It's not my interest. My interest is more like how you did it. So the strategy. I guess nobody was trying to memorize all the elements at once, right? Rather than that, you compare this part with this part and this part with this part, something like that, like the one by one comparison, right? That's because our brains have limited processing capacity. It's really limited. So trying to handle too much information like this one, that leads to the overflow of the brain. That's the simple foundation. And hence we should think of our brains as inherently lazy, just like in this quote, thinking for us is like the swimming for the cats. So of course we can do it, but we don't want. And our customers are like that as well, of course. Hence, as everybody knows, instead of thinking carefully, we use intuitive thinking. Like for example, here, area A, right, and area B. Which area do you think is darker? Then I guess A looks darker than B, right? However, in reality, these are exactly the same. It's identical. I don't think it is, but it is. So let's check it in the following video. See, it's the same. Yeah, believe or not, it is identical. Your brain knows how the light and shadow works and what the checkerboard is, and based on this knowledge, immediately it calculates the darkness. That's how it works inside our brain. What you see now, or hear now, or smell, or taste, or whatever you perceive, that is not the copy of the external world. Instead, it's really like the constructed world, and the construction is done by brain automatically without conscious awareness, and it happens very swiftly. That is the reality. The similar thing can happen for the emotional aspects. Look at this illustration to the right. The primary interest is about the size of these creatures, I guess. So the background creature looks larger than the foreground creature, right? But that is not the interest of myself at this moment. It is more like what kind of emotions they express. based on the facial expression. That was tested in the controlled experiment in the United States. And here it shows the results of this experiment. Simply, for the foreground creature, more than 90% of the respondents says, oh, it seems fearful. Whereas only about 10% said it's angry. But on the other hand, for the background creature, the trend is opposite, right? It seems very interesting to me because, again, these guys are identical in terms of the physical properties, but not only just for the visual information, but more for the emotional aspect. It seems like intuitively we get something. This kind of things can be applied to many in-market activities, including the ad communication. This is one of the examples, I guess, which is the TV copy, TV commercial. Let me play this together so I can show you. Okay. What did you think? At least for me, along with the context and music and some other effects, this guy's facial expression seems to be changing, although it's continuously neutral in reality. I think that is one of the interesting part of this TV commercial. Don't you think so? By the way, anyway, the last example in this series is about the decision making. So this experiment was done in Newcastle University in UK. This laboratory had the shelf for the drinks, but it was not for free. So there was a price list here. How much for coffee, how much for orange juice, and so on and so forth. Based on this price, students put the money onto this box here, right? And then they can get the drinks. The system is very simple, but there is no people. So whether they pay or how much they pay, that depends on their honesty. Then unfortunately, the students are not so honest in this case, unfortunately. So on average, for the first week, they paid about 0.7 pound per liter of milk. But on the next week, they paid only 0.2 pound, right? And then in the third week, they paid more and less, more. On the week by week basis, they paid more or less kind of things. It's a zigzag pattern. Why it happened? Yeah, that was not by chance. It was based on the tricks that the professor did. So she downloaded the posters from the internet and put them onto the wall on a week by week basis. The posters were either face or flowers, like this way. So as you can see, all the weeks where the face was placed, student paid more money. That seems very interesting to me, and not only just interesting, but also important in many ways. One reason is that this is really subconscious. No students are thinking like, oh, there is a flower, so I pay today, right? It's very strange. They don't do that. Instead, maybe they feel something unconsciously, and based on that kind of driver, they decided whether they pay or how much they pay, that kind of things. So it's really like the non-conscious process. The actual experiment itself is still very controversial, and in academia, still a lot of debate are ongoing. That said, I believe as practitioners, I think we should keep in mind that a lot of activities in the daily life of the consumers, they are really non-conscious and affected by the non-conscious processes that are the key here. If that is the case, then the question is how to approach or engage such consumers. In this talk, I recommend focusing on two key brain functions, emotion and memory. I'm going to show you why for emotion first, and then the memory comes later. For the emotion, I will show you two experiments from the neuroscience area. The first one is using the loss aversion phenomenon. I think most of you knows about it, but let's review the typical one once again. So in this case, firstly, you will receive $50, but you need to choose between one of the two options. These are the two options. So if you choose option one, then you can keep $30 for sure. If you choose option two, then you can do the gamble with 50-50 chance. If you are lucky, then you can get $50. But if you are not, then you will lose $50. Then which options do you want to choose? That is the question. The similar question can be asked under the different frame here. For example, if you choose option one, then you lose $20 for sure. Then if you choose option two, you can do the same gamble as above. Which one do you want to choose? That's the question. Okay. So, as everybody knows, the monetary values are exactly the same between two scenarios, but our feeling is a bit different, and it is reflected in the responses from the participants. For example, here and the loss frame, more than 60% of the respondents said, "Oh, I want to do gamble." Perhaps because they don't want to lose $20, whereas under gain frame, only about 40% said, "Yeah, I want to do gamble." Right? It is interesting. And not only just interesting, but also here it's important again that the scientist has scanned the brain activity when the offer was given to the participants. And the chart on the right hand side is the brain activity as compared to the baseline. So, for example, under the gain frame, sure offer is to get $30 for sure. That's the offer. Then you see the brain activity has increased compared to the baseline. On the other hand, under the loss frame, the offer was to lose $20 for sure. Then the brain activity has decreased. It doesn't reflect any monetary value per se. Rather than that, it reflects loss aversion kind of feeling, right? It's quite interesting. And I want to note that this particular brain activity has been coming from this specific brain parts called amygdala. No worries about the name of the anatomy, right? It's not that important, but I'd like to note that these are the deep structures. It's the brain section. So these parts are the surface regions, and this kind of areas are sitting deep inside our brain. And this kind of brain parts are shared across different species like lizards, fish, birds. All those animals have this kind of parts as well as the signals from their evolutionary history. That is the point. They have been using this kind of signals for survival, and still this is there in our brain as a primitive type of emotional signals. In other words, it is also called as action-oriented emotion, whether we approach or withdraw from the target. That signal is still there. And not just still there, we still use it for our decision making. That is reflected in the next experiment here using the moral judgment. This is just an example story. Let's review it together. So imagine you are on the lifeboat, which is quite crowded, in danger. So if nothing is done, it will sink and everybody on board will die. including yourself, or it's really scary. However, there is an injured person on board. He or she will not survive in any case. If you throw this person away from the boat, then everybody, including you, will be saved. Then the question is, would you throw this person away? That's the question as an example. Yeah, I know it's a tough decision and there is no correct answers per se. And in this case, only about 20% of the people said, yes, I will, or I would throw that person away. The interesting part is that there was another group of participants in this study. They had damage to a specific parts of the brain that is called ventral medial prefrontal cortex. Again, there is no need to memorize these kind of things, but the important thing is that because of this damage, their response has been altered like this way. So this group of respondents said, yes, I would throw that person away. It's quite remarkable. They have been belonging to this group before they had the damage, but then after the damage, their response has been shifted. Why does that happen? See, this part is different from the other parts which we have seen in the loss aversion experiment. And the interesting part is that these brain parts are receiving a lot of different information from different parts of the brain, including amygdala, which we have seen in the loss aversion experiment. So when we make a decision, it receives primitive emotional signals from amygdala, then it is integrated with several other information and converted into the value signals, which can be used to make our decisions. By the damage to this kind of functions, these patients cannot use the emotion properly, and hence their decision has been altered. That's the story. And that is not only myself, but also almost all the neuroscientists agrees more or less. For example, this renowned professor is talking about his patients who has the damage to the emotion center. So without emotion, what happens? Let's listen in to his interview, the particular parts. It's about 1 minute.
But the thing I most liked in these patients when we asked them about restaurants, and this was really quite remarkable. And they said, "What restaurant do you want to go to tonight?" And said, "Well, we could go to this one." And they said, "But I take it that this restaurant has been rather empty recently, so that's probably a bad sign. It's a sign that the food may not be so good. On the other hand, it's true that if it is more empty, we're likely to get a table, and therefore we should go there." But then, and the thing will go on endlessly until you really feel like pounding on the table and said, "Well, get real and choose." But the reason why they can't choose is that they haven't got this sort of lift that comes from emotion. It is emotion that allows you to mark things as good, bad, or indifferent, literally in the flesh. And it is that kind of emotional impetus that they are lacking. They cannot conjure up for a given situation an emotional state that would decide them in one direction or another. And of course, this is something that we all can
see like this way. It is actually the emotion that drives our decision in many cases. That is reflected in the in-market data as well. This is published by P&G. They have divided their ads into 2 groups, simply ads with emotion versus ads without emotion. And they discovered that ads with emotional appeal yielded a 9-fold return on investment compared to those without emotional appeal, right? As in here, we think fast, and based on that thinking, we make a decision and take an action, and afterward we feel something, and hence we were trying to persuade consumers, right? But based on the emerging view, from the neuroscience or cognitive science in general, in many cases, we feel first as a primitive emotional signal, and that drives the decision and taking an action. And after that, we rationalize something. If that is the case, then the emotional engagement is quite important. And that is the reason that I said emotion is one of the key brain functions here. Then the next question is, what happens after the rationalization? Typically, it's not the end of the story, right? It can affect the future decisions by affecting the future emotions like this way, right? It can be immediate, but it can be more like days or even years later. And it is the memory that can make this happen, right? So let's look at the memory in the brain just a little bit. It's really an interesting topic, actually. In the brain, the long-term memory is stored in multiple different systems like this way. So these categorizations are not for the convenience, but more like this is the way the memories are stored in the brain. Like, for example, on the right-hand side of this chart, it's called non-declarative memory. That includes skills and habits. For example, like riding a bicycle, once it is acquired, you can do that even 1 year later or 2 years later, right? That's not because your skeleton or muscles remembers that. Rather than that, it is stored into your brain and it is accessed and recalled when you try to ride. That kind of access is done under non-conscious mind, right? And you cannot explain how to do that verbally, and hence it is named as non-declarative memory. On the other hand, on the the left-hand side here, that is called declarative memory. It's the typical memory, I think. That is again divided into two different subcategories, semantic memory and episodic memory. Semantic memory is about the facts, meanings, knowledge, and so on and so forth. Whereas the episodic memory, this one is more like the personal events or experiences. So it's typically expressed as when, where, with whom, how, and so on. Right? Because these are the different systems in the brain, they have distinct implications for marketing. Yeah, everything is important, but for the sake of time, here, let's focus on the declarative memory, basically. So the semantic memory is typically explained like this way. It's structured like a network where the related elements are interconnected to each other like this way. So the brand assets are the typical examples. When the consumers memorize new elements, they do so by associating them with the existing network. So it's like the incremental connection. By this way, consequently, when they encounter part of these elements, it can trigger the recall of all the brands. So the strong brand actually have developed the robust, extensive, and distinct networks within their mind, within consumer mind, right? So it's important for the branding in many sense. However, that is just one side of the declarative memory. And typically we tend to forget about the other side of the memory, but it's also important, right? The episodic memory, which can encompass brand experiences like the old nostalgic memories or an interesting experience with my favorite animals like this way. Both are quite important, but in a different way. So when we view the memory from this perspective, it becomes strongly relevant to the long-term impact of your brand through like equity or loyalty or positioning, whatever we call it, or whatever the concept is. Memory is quite relevant to any kind of things. So this is one of the key reasons that I've emphasized long-term memory as one of the critical brain function along with the emotion. Oh, okay, now, so it appears that the neuroscience perspective is essential, but then the next question is how to approach. Let me use only 5 minutes to think about how to engage or how to use neuroscience. The most straightforward idea is, I think, to use tools to gather neuro-related information right from the consumers. In a textbook, typically the tools are divided into two groups. One is to get the response from the brain, whereas the other one is like the biometric recordings and behavioral measures. Like, for example, you might be familiar with eye tracking. This is, of course, very powerful in some sense. It can get the information about the attentional focus as well as the navigation orders, for example. Yeah, that's important and useful for one aspect of consumer research and implementation. However, maybe it's not enough, right? Because as we have seen, in many cases, consumers' behavior is affected by the non-conscious processes. Hence, the information about the focus may not be sufficient to understand the consumers holistically. Then, if we use electrodermal activity or some other biometric reactions like heart rate, respiration rate, yes, they can provide some sort of emotional information like the intensity of the emotion that might be useful. But again, there is no direct clue about the memory related functions. Then the next idea is to get some signals from the brain. Yeah, it can be very powerful if it is used properly. Like this way, for example. Yeah, please note that this is not the real data. It's just the dummy data that is made by me. But like this way, for example, the emotion and the memory and even other information like the attentional level, these are captured from the brain directory and on the scene by scene basis or second by second basis that can provide a lot of insightful information for us. So it might be very, very powerful, but unfortunately, the story is not that simple, of course. The tools have both advantages and disadvantages as well, of course. One is quite good at the temporal resolution, but not really good at the spatial resolution. So we don't know where the signal is coming from in the three-dimensional space of the brain, but it is very good at the timing and vice versa. And in addition to that, of course, we must consider the substantial cost, right, which can amount to millions of dollars and require years of investment. It's not that easy. If you see some quite affordable offer from the agencies, maybe you want to be very careful. It might be misleading. So it's not so easy and simple, but no worries. There is a very good trick. I am always saying this. So let's get back to the definition of consumer neuroscience. See, application of neuroscience knowledge. It's already like the application of neuroscience. It's just the knowledge, but it can add an extra layer of the value to various stages of marketing practice, including the marketing research as well as the implementation as well, directly into your daily business maybe. So it's quite simple in this case. And ROI wise, maybe this is the best way. Maybe it depends, but let's think about like this way because typically people want to use tools rather than this kind of ways. Then let's explore the snippets of our findings in here. Again, for the sake of time, I can pick up only a part of our learnings, just the general one from the past research as well as the academic field of neuroscience. Since we've learned three important things like limited capacity, emotion, and memory, and hence this section is divided into these three parts just 10 minutes from now. The first one is about the limited capacity. Because our brain has only the limited capacity, first and foremost, please keep everything simple. That's quite important. If it comes to the visual information, then no more than 4 visual clusters. This is the guideline, and typically it can be applied to any kind of visual information. If it exceeds this guideline, then you can utilize some principles like the Gestalt principles that is illustrated here. So objects placed closely or similarly placed, the similar in terms of the physical properties that can be perceived as one group, right? So like this way, for example, the illustration to the right, you can see it is viewed as the application of figure ground principle and similarity and proximity. Those tricks allows us to perceive 2 bottles instead of a bunch of text, right? So it's not the number of elements, but more like the number of chunks or groups. So always think about the groupings. In other case, leveraging the senses, that is another way to engage limited capacity brain, because these senses are processed in parallel in the different parts of the brain, and hence it prevents overflowing. Even with the still images, you may still be able to use cross-modal effect. So take this Coca-Cola Europe campaign as an example, by saying like, oh, try not to hear this. Yeah, you can see that here, right? Try not to hear this. If we see this, ironically, we cannot stop thinking about it, and it seems like auditory cortex is likely to be activated. So I feel like I can hear the fizzing of bubbles or the sound of uncapping, even though there is no actual physical sound in here. That's another good way. The last example in this part is about the mental simulation. That can be used for the intuitive thinking as well, because it often relies on action. So materials like this one, yeah, for example, the fork is placed onto the right side, then the right-handers are more easily able to simulate their actions, and hence it is intuitively processed. That is known to be increasing the purchase intent. This kind of experiment is again still very controversial, but I've seen a lot of real life examples as well from my past experience in the research agency. So this is just an image, not the actual study materials. But as you can see here on the Coca-Cola bottles, it seems to be very intuitive about where to grab, like by the shape of the bottles and the position of the labels, as compared to the left one. It looks a bit unnatural to me, at least personally. Then the next part is about emotion, right? In this topic, I always recommend having the anticipation and enjoyment phase in addition to consumption, especially it comes to the food and beverage, but also other consumer goods as well, I believe. Remember the feel, act, and think flow. It's like the anticipation phase stimulates wanting response or approach motivation, that's more important than the rational thinking, right? And then the enjoyment phase can support liking of your product and brand. Both are important, but in a different ways. Social interaction is also highly effective at engaging consumers emotionally. Humans, from the evolutionary history, humans are quite inherently social beings. And so when we see something very social, then that is very engaging. That's the intuitive process, but engages consumers emotionally. Be cautious when portraying negative emotional expressions, as emotions are highly contagious. Even though if it might be the issues that your product can resolve, still it might affect your long-term branding quite in negative ways. So we should always be careful. When we see someone's facial expression or other emotional expressions, we can catch it quite intuitively. It's the automatic process. The last topic is about the long-term memory, right? So it's simple. The first topic is about the consistency. As we've seen in the semantic memory, the elements are stored as the network weights. So the new elements can be added as an additional elements into the existing network. By building this kind of consistent networks, which is quite distinct and quite clear, then consequently it helps record your brand quite easily, which is very important in terms of the branding. But at the same time, don't forget about the episodic memory as well. We tend to forget about this side of memory. So it's very important. In this case, it's a IKEA store or the Nike store. It's the physical store. But even on the digital world or e-commerce space, I still believe that we can give some immersive experience. Especially nowadays, we can consider sort of virtual reality or augmented reality or whatever the virtual power can be considered in this space as well. The last topic is about the relevancy. Yeah, when it comes to the long-term memory, personal relevancy is always important. Our resource is limited, so I don't want to, or nobody want to use such a limited resources to remember the irrelevant information. So the personal relevancy in many sense is important. In this case, the women wearing the hijab in the markets like Indonesia or Malaysia or wherever, it can be viewed as more relevant than without. So we should always keep this kind of personal relevancy in mind when it comes to the communication. As a final thought, let me remind you of a famous quote by David Ogilvy. So consumers don't think how they feel, and they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. And this is the reason that it is invaluable to keep the neuroscience perspective, not like using the tools, but more like using the knowledge and keeping the neuroscience perspective in mind as an additional layer of your work. That is it. Yeah, thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Satoshi-san.
Thank you.
For this interesting session. I think we have quite a few people who joined us. Let's see if we have some questions as well. Let me just check the live streaming one. So, Harris, would you like to check the live streaming and share if there's any questions there, please?
Yeah, no questions from the live stream.
Okay. If anyone has any questions, so please feel free to unmute and ask or ask through the chat, whether in the live streaming or in Zoom. You can put in your questions in the chat or just ask here. Ruby, would you like to ask any questions? I had seen Ruby on.
No, I'm all good. I just want to give class. That's all.
Okay, sure.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ruby, for joining. Anyone else has any questions or else?
Hi Sanchita, this is Nigel. I've got a question. So it's related to gameplay and how at different stages of a game we usually provide a reward such as vouchers. I noticed that people were playing the game intrinsically without, or rather the vouchers didn't have any impact on increasing their session time. Is there any way to think about this in terms of trying to improve the session time or how long they played? Given that extrinsic rewards did not have any impact.
Why do you think the extrinsic reward didn't have impact?
So what we're saying is that even after we've given the reward, they do not, the user base did not play longer.
Oh wow, it's quite remarkable, because typically reward is one of the most important way to increase that kind of activity. It's more like the addiction. I don't want to say like addiction, but the systems in the brain is quite similar. So the dopamine systems are always working as the anticipation systems. If we can anticipate a very good reward, then that's the motivation. Then we want to do that again and again. But if the reward is not very much like motivating, then maybe you can think about the different type of reward and different type of scheduling of the reward. Let's say like a slot machine in Marina Bay, for example. It's not always rewarding. Sometimes we lose, but sometimes we get a lot of reward from the machine, right? That is actually based on the logic of the reinforcement learning. If we can expect everything on schedule, then that's not very motivating. But if we feel like, oh, maybe I can get a very good one, but maybe not, then let's try. That is another way to motivate people. Does that make sense, or do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I do understand what you mean.
Yeah. So you can get some hint from the slot machine or any kind of activities in the basement of Marina Bay if you go there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Satoshi Sanjo, we have a few more questions, and I think one of them is from the live streaming attendee, that some of the examples which were shown is in graphic. How do we insert neuroscience or apply neuroscience for marketing success in a non-graphic approach?
Non-graphic means what?
This,
like the auditory communication, or
no images, no videos, kind of a situation where it's.
Yeah, the basic principles are always the same. We should keep the limited capacity in mind. That's the starting line. So even if it is the verbal information by the auditory stimuli, still we need to keep things quite minimum in terms of the information load. In an interesting study which we have done for the FMCG category, that was about the concept study. We have tested 15 different concepts from 4 different brands, and each concept has the list of benefits. What we realized is that the purchase intention score is negatively correlated with the number of bullet points in the benefit statement, which means that if we say too much, then consumers are going away from the concept. That's not really like the content itself, but more like how many we want to say. And it is not really like the graphical information, but still the principles can be applied. It's really similar. And again, of course, we should keep in mind that the emotion is the driver. So do not try to persuade, but more like to engage consumers in some different way, even though it is not visual. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think that's a good. The question is from a person who's on live stream, so I guess that's yeah, that answers the question. Nigel, can I request you to mute, please? I'm muting you because there's some noise coming in from there. We also have some more questions. Sean, would you like to ask your question? Saying it's about brand recovery. Are there specific differences? So that's from Sean.
Hi, yeah, it's just to neuroscience. We were talking about long-term memory. If any of those long-term memories have negative connotations, is there a better or specific approach to mitigate that?
Sorry, I couldn't get the question. I'm so sorry. Could you repeat that again?
If within the long-term memory, if the brand has some negative emotional connection, is there a specific model for mitigating that?
Yeah, that is the thing that we have to avoid. It's really risky to have the negative connotation with your brand. It should be basically positive. And even if some sort of insight is associated with the negative information, like that the toothpaste can be related to the negative issues of your teeth, but that can be also associated with the payoff scenes or ideas or benefits. And those positive side should be quite strongly linked with the negative part as well. That can help reduce the negative impact. So even though, maybe you cannot avoid some pieces of negative information in the long-term memory, in that case, you should think about the other way to reduce that negative impact.
Thank you.
RH, I guess yours is not more of a question, but you were trying to just give answers to the gameplay thing, if I'm not wrong. Okay, yeah. So we also have something from PP. I think that's also, again, some examples which you have provided, if I'm not wrong. So, oh, okay. It is actually a question. So Satoshi-san, if you can see the chat, it's a long question. So it would be good if you can read it. I'll read it out to you, but it's basically about the morality when putting into practice. And so she's provided 2 examples and wants to know if content A is a good way to communicate with consumers. Because content A is a loss frame, while content B is a gain frame. So PP is that what you're looking
for?
It's
an interesting question. According to the behavioral economics principles, loss frame is more effective, and in this case A seems to be more consistent with the loss frame. The case B is more like just the fact, and hence I'm not sure if this is viewed as the positive frame. But it is more likely that A is better than B in terms of the ROI. I think get baggage loss coverage. Yeah, that is actually the way typical insurance are appealing to the consumers, including myself, I think, and hence, most likely, I think A is better than B. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Thanks, Satoshi-san. If there's no other questions, then we will end it on time for this session. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. And hopefully you like the session. I think I got quite a good feedback, actually, about this session. So if you have any other question, please contact that fig tree, or you can contact Satoshi-san directly. And we also had just for your just for you to know, Satoshi-san, we had more than 100 people who joined us on the live streaming. So yeah, so that's and I think some of them will also view the video. Typically, some of them don't get time during the weekdays, so they view the video later because we share it internally. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Satoshi-san, for taking this time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Bye. Bye, everyone.